Good morning, and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel. I'm Pirandoro, your host for the next hour, and here's what we'll be exploring on the program today. The South African Cabinet has approved the criminalization of hate crimes and hate speech. But some people are asking a question: is this a move to stifle the freedom of expression? We'll explore that in some detail. The Ugandan government has imposed tax on social media use in a bid to raise revenues. But people are also asking the question if that isn't to try and silence critics in the country. We'll also be taking a sneak peek inside our Sunday newspapers, as we usually do. And lastly, a really bizarre story. Russian journalist who turns up alive after he had been reported murdered. Okay, but before we engage with our panel with all of those stories, let's first take a look at what's inside on the front of our Sunday newspapers. And we start with the Sunday Times, which is leading with a story on how DA leader Mmusi Maimane has admitted for the first time to difficulties in his relationship with the Western Cape Premier Helen Zille, saying that she should have been removed from decision-making structures after she stepped down as party leader in May 2015. The City Press, well, that's running with a story about why the Guptas keep on winning against the MPA. Yeah, the article reads, "Stretched, overwhelmed and under pressure is why the prosecutors responsible for seizing the Gupta family assets have lost against their lawyers 3 times in 3 months. Insiders at the National Prosecuting Authority, close to the Special Commercial Crimes Unit, which is directing the criminal investigation into state capture, say that so far they've absolutely nothing against a good Gupta business partner and former President Jacob Zuma's son, Duduzane." That's an interesting development. Well, the Sunday Independent, that's carrying a story about controversial chief executive Siyabonga Gama, who's at the center of a storm involving a 1 billion rand tender awarded to German software company SAP. This after documents showed he personally asked the Acquisitions and Disposals Committee to award the contract without following tender processes. And you know, the SAP, of course, Gupta linked as well. The Sunday Tribune, well, let's take a look. That's this morning leading with how a 63-year-old Durban man's hopes of running his 20th Comrades Marathon were dashed on Monday when a tear gas canister fired into a crowd protesting outside Chatsworth Police Station broke his shin bone. That is just heartbreaking. The Weekend Argus, that's leading with how taxi bosses have moved their deadline to grind their service to a halt Wednesday, as 2 major taxi associations are threatening to cripple the city's public transport system if their demands are not met. This could get very inconvenient for commuters. Well, Swaziland, let's cross our borders. The Sunday Observer there is running with a story about how Prime Minister Sibusiso Dlamini's fate will be uncertain after his term comes to an end. And then we go to West Africa, Nigeria. The Daily Trust there is leading with a story on how only 3 out of 14 local governments in Zamfara state have not come under attack by armed bandits that have been terrorizing communities there for years. Hundreds of lives and property worth billions of naira have been lost to the rampaging criminals whose attacks are targeted at rural communities. All right. Right, you're watching Media Monitor on this Sunday morning, and so you've had a look at what's on the front pages of the major newspapers. We'll delve into those a little bit later on, but there were other developments that took place during the course of this week. And let's start with this. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development on Wednesday introduced the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, which will make it a criminal offence to make racist remarks, amongst other things. Its introduction follows the sentencing, of course, of a famous case, Vicky Momberg, a white woman who was handed an unprecedented 2-year jail term for a racist rant against a black police officer. Let's take a look at this package and remind us of the story.
The department told Parliament that crimen injuria isn't enough of a deterrent. Therefore, legislation is necessary to address the increasing number of incidents motivated by prejudice.
Clauses 3, and for the first time in our history, we have statutory offences that deal with conduct that is based on various forms of intoleration.
If passed, such matters of hate crimes and speech will only be dealt with in high or regional courts as testament to their serious nature. But MPs weren't convinced of the necessity for the bill and whether or not it tackled racism.
Are we not trying to criminalize moral issues without taking society along with us?
We had the Momberg case where it was and she was found guilty on 4 counts. And the first time a person has been sentenced to jail for hate speech. So the question is correctly as you put, do we really need this at all? The hate speech side. And this is what we as a committee will have to delve into.
An issue Deputy Minister John Jeffrey disputed.
The bill does criminalize racism. So I'm not sure, but our constitutional framework is based on the equality clause, and that any inequality then has consequences. And
the committee will now take advice from Parliament's legal services on the bill before deciding on how to proceed with its processing. Lukhanyo Khalada, SABC News, Parliament.
All right, so that bill is moving ever so slowly to closer and closer to becoming law, as you've just heard from there, our reporter, with the NCOP, and then it'll be signed by the President. But the question is this a lot? Is it too much? Is it not enough? Well, to help us unpack this, my panelists that are going to be with us throughout the program, I want to introduce and say good morning to Queenan Maswabi, who's a journalist with the Huffington Post in South Africa. Welcome. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Peter.
And a familiar face, a media analyst at Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Okay, so let's start with you, Queenan. This hate crimes, this I think everybody understood, but the waters seem to have been muddied a little bit with the hate speech portion of this bill. What are your immediate thoughts for some of the points that are being raised by both sides?
So I think it is definitely necessary at this point, but government needs to do it in the right way. They need to be very particular in how they're going to implement it, because it might end up being a disaster if they don't do it properly. So in terms of hate crimes, definitely we need something that's going to ensure that people are held accountable for whatever they're doing if it is inappropriate. But for hate speech, definitely I think it's something that government needs to look at closer and see how they can implement it in the correct manner.
William?
So one of the, as Queenan's just pointed out, forgive me, there are 2 core elements, the hate crimes section and then the hate speech section. And the hate crimes one, I think that there seems to be broad consensus on around its necessity, around the broadness of terms that are applied to there and the various groupings. When you get to the hate speech one, it's a far more tricky business to deal with, and for a number of reasons, and rightly so. If you read our constitution, there are only 4 different kinds of speech that are actually unprotected forms of speech. And it's on that basis that we then have the Promotion of Unfair Discrimination Act, PROPUDA, Promotion and Prevention of it, and we then have other pieces of legislation, including the Equality Bill Act, that kind of navigates that space, because you're dealing with things that are very tricky. So one of the problems that we found in the first draft, which has been largely mitigated, is that it was overly broad. So for example, if you said, I hate all people who work in call centers, you would have been currently
No. Yes. Yes.
The wrong way. So when we talk about issues like xenophobia and there's hate speech, when it comes to that, it could incite people to go and attack maybe foreigners or whatever. In that case, it's quite clear and it's logical. But in some instances, it could be a problem if it's not clearly defined. And I think that's where the problem comes in.
So, you know, we have a law that's worked, crimen injuria.
Yeah.
Vicky Momberg was jailed.
Yeah.
Do we need more laws if the laws that are there are working?
Well, there's a very strong and very compelling series of arguments that suggest that in fact we don't, that there is more than enough to deal with the issues currently. There's a very big concern that the way that it's currently framed will in fact be used in a counterproductive manner, which is to say that it's not going to be used to deal with cases of racism which by and large occur from white people against black people, but broadly defined. But that in fact it's going to be used by minorities and far-right minorities in order to kind of bring kind of counterclaims against different people. And that's not kind of really what it's intending to do. So there are some very difficult and very tricky issues that are there. I think the problem with all of these things is that you tend to get a political idea behind it. We know that elections are approaching. It's got to look like the government is taking strong, clear action on these issues. And that, you know, there's no way that I think they're going to step back and say, well, don't worry, we don't need it, we've been convinced. I think that we need to be saying, well, if this is coming as a piece of legislation, what are the different criteria that actually will help advance our democracy and allow that balance between freedom of expression, where people say things that may be offensive and horrible, as opposed to things that cross a line into hate speech.
So I am intrigued a little bit because, you know, you go to America and you can say whatever you want to say, pretty much, and that's it. Are we in danger of becoming a nanny state? Although our history is slightly different and perhaps we have some real issues that other countries never had to deal with. So are we overcooking this? Should we allow it to evolve over time, or do we need to hit the nail on the head as much as we can and then soften our stance over time?
I think on the one hand, we're going through kind of a second mobilization in South Africa. I mean, we went through apartheid and a lot happened and law was put into place to make sure that those who were oppressed were no longer. But I mean, I think we're going through a second phase of where we're seeing so many racist incidents. And I mean, it's stirring up the country so much. So I think also government is caught in that situation where they don't know what to do. How do you hold people accountable for being racist or for being discriminatory? So I think they're caught in that kind of situation. But at the same time, we need to be careful, as you're saying, of just throwing laws around. Make sure that whatever we do implement is watertight at the end of the day.
I mean, is this again? You know, one fears that we're trying to mollycoddle a little bit, and I just wonder, racism, has it really increased? I saw a report the other day that's saying that race relations actually had improved, or is it just that social media has exploded certain events over time, and that's really what we're looking at? That perhaps that the racism story is improving. I don't know if this study can be believed. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, and we need proper and detailed research to give us some of those answers. But just because it's not necessarily increasing doesn't mean that we shouldn't be taking action against it, because of the significant harm and the danger that it poses to our democracy. So I think that, you know, in a lot of societies around the world, certainly on our own continent, in Rwanda, for example, there's certain terms and phrases that you just don't use because of what happened in Rwanda. You know, if you look at Germany, there's certain very clear, firm lines in the sand that are drawn around talking about Nazis and Nazism. And similarly to that in South Africa, we've said there are particular terms, phrases, most obvious being the K word, that we say we do not use this word. It is as part of our process of becoming a deeper democracy, we don't use it. And these things are shifting, you know, they're not fixed, but that our constitution has got very limited and very clearly defined grounds upon which speech is no longer protected. And let's be clear, it doesn't fall foul of the constitution, it's speech that's not protected. And what that means is then the state is very entitled to step in and take action against those people that violate those things. And they're very tightly defined. So you have to it has to be advocacy of hatred. I hate black people. It has to incite harm. It must be it has to be clear hatred, and it has to be advocacy for the incitement to cause harm or war. So it's not just enough to say I hate black people. You have to say let's go and kill them. Well, you can, but that's the point. Right? You can say you hate people, but it's got to be about advocacy of that, and you've got to be incitement to cause harm. So you've got to say I hate these particular people with blue hair, let's go and kill them all.
Okay.
Right?
So I can get up in the morning and say, I don't like Liverpool supporters, and leave it at that.
So that's exactly the thing. The previous version of the bill, if you had said, I hate all Liverpool supporters, you would have fallen foul of it. Right now, because it's on the basis of a collective group of people, which is far too broad, you know, because you should be able to say those kinds of things. I hate Liverpool supporters. But now if you say, I hate Liverpool supporters, unless you do it on one of the clearly defined criteria in our constitution, it shouldn't constitute hate speech.
Okay, you know what, so we can talk about this for hours, and I'm sure that this is going to be a subject of debate for quite a while to come. We're going to take a quick pause for thought, and then when we come back, we'll take a look at something else. So stay with us for that.
And shut up, you stay lazy and listen.
The Honourable President told me to shut up.
It's up to the leadership of the DA to make a decision whether we continue to fight like they're doing now, or we put the people of the city of Cape Town first.
You must go, Chief. You call me a dog here.
Come back and leave after giving us a signal.
This is SABC News.
A very good morning to you, and thank you so much indeed for choosing Morning Live.
But I want to know the basic thing.
Griselda Lewis, SABC News, in Parktown, Johannesburg.
Zimbabwe, Mzwandile Mbeje, SABC News, Luanda, Angola.
Let's take a look at your market indicators.
Thanks for staying with Morning Live. Let's bring you your sports news.
Let's take a look at your satellite image.
Set the agenda for the day with Morning Live.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Before the break, we were taking a look at the hate crimes and hate speech bill, and some people are saying this might stifle freedom of expression. Well, let's go to Uganda now, where Uganda's parliament has imposed a tax on the use of social media, all in a bid to raise revenue, apparently. Users will be charged 200 shillings or 66 cents a day for services such as Facebook, Twitter and WhatsApp, and that amounts to about $19, 240 Rand a year. Now, it may seem like not a lot, but this is in a country where the gross domestic product per capita is around $600, which is 7,750 Rand in 2016. That's according to the World Bank's figures. Let's take a look at this story, give us some background on this social media tax.
Activists say this is another attempt by President Yoweri Museveni to stifle freedom of expression and quash dissent to his 32-year rule. During the last general election in 2016, the government blocked access to Facebook, Twitter and WhatsApp. It is a move used by other entrenched rulers in Africa in response to grassroots movements against them.
The regime is so scared of this population which is so connected and so informed. Everything is being exposed every day on social media, all the decadence in the governance, in all the institutions, you know, all failures are being paraded on social media every day. So in a move to curtail the social media, they are taxing it. And I believe much more is going to be done to restrict social media usage in Uganda.
Data costs in Africa are already among some of the highest in the world. Ugandans say the new cost will keep people already struggling to make ends meet off the internet.
A tax of 200 costs a lot, especially to the youth who use internet, when we are searching for job applications, when we are communicating with friends, it really becomes another expense, yet we don't work.
Of Uganda's 41 million people, 23.6 million are mobile phone subscribers and 17 million use the internet. Authorities say the new tax will be operational in July.
So there you have it. If you are living in Uganda, here's the story. The moment you go onto WhatsApp or onto Twitter, the mobile operator, every SIM card that logs into a social media network that's specified, you get charged, and that tax then gets passed on to the government. So let me start with you, William. Is this about raising revenue or silencing voices, or is like kill two birds with one stone?
I mean, I'm not sure how much they might seek to raise from it, but there's no question it's about seeking to silence voices and also track them. You know, I think one of the problems that governments who don't know how to deal with our emerging digital reality have is that they don't know what they're doing. Many of them, you know, they have this idea that you can go back to the good old days when you could control the media, and that meant going to the radio broadcasting thing or the TV station and putting some soldiers in the building, and anyone who says anything otherwise, you take them out and shoot them. You know, that was a very nice, easy way of controlling the media. Now they can't do that. You know, how on earth do you control it when this is something that is run and governed in most instances by entities that don't have any kind of legitimate or legal presence necessarily even in those countries? So how do you start to know who's on these WhatsApp things, who's on these Facebook systems, who's on this Twitter? How do we start to track them? And critically then, how do we start to silence them? Because you can bet that the moment that applies, there's standard laws about different speech and hate speech linking to the earlier thing, and their laws around speech that isn't legal is going to come into play in a lot more systematized manner.
There does seem to be a bit of naivete here by the government, and I just wonder if they honestly think that they can shut down people's voices in a world that is completely digital now.
I think it's ridiculous, firstly. I don't think that any government should be propagating that. I think social media has been used as a very powerful tool, and if they shut people down, definitely they're not going to sit back and accept it. I mean, what they did in 2016 again with the elections, making sure that social media was shut down because they didn't want rumors to be spread, is already a sign that it causes, or it seems like a threat to them. But one thing they can't do is stop people from going on social media. It's not going to work. I don't think any country can actually go ahead with that. And just recently in Tanzania, the government won a case, unfortunately, against bloggers in the country to stop them from just publishing what they want to, and actually forcing them to reveal their funders. So it's also a kind of a trend that you see in some African countries where they're using social media or online presence, stopping it from happening because they know that people are blogging about the truth, they're tweeting about the truth, they're Facebooking about the truth, and they don't want that.
But the other side of this, of course, is fake news. And unfortunately, this, as we've seen in America, we don't know how much it influenced, but we know for certain that it did influence. And so we may be vulnerable to abuse if these things aren't policed or marshaled in some way.
No, there's no doubt, you know. So I think that that's the argument that a lot of the governments will use in order to justify a lot of the kind of laws that they're passing. But they tend to be one-sided and are all about saying you can't say these kinds of things about our president or about our government because otherwise you're fomenting hatred or falsehoods, right? Which is one of their common ideas. So we do have to be very cautious about misinformation campaigns. You know, we've seen them, never mind in America, in South Africa with the Bell Pottinger scandal. We've seen people that actively seek to undermine and destroy our democracy. So it's not about saying that there aren't some very real, clear, present threats posed by these things, but the response to that isn't to say, well, we're going to impose a tax. The response to that is to say, well, let's talk with these operators. Let's find out how they're doing it. Let's, as they did in Germany, their response, maybe some would say, is a bit extreme. They passed a law that says if you post something that puts out this particular term and you get notified of it and you don't take it down in 24 hours or less, you're going to get a massive fine in millions of euros of imposed against you, and because of that, Facebook's gone and they've got people monitoring and tracking these things. So as we approach elections ourselves, you know, we need to look and say, how do we update our electoral code of conduct in order to make sure that there are mechanisms available to people to report, to deal with these things, and critically, in as much as there are the bad sides of social media, clearly and unambiguously, it's overwhelmingly powerful in terms of being able to spread voter information and voter education in a way that we've never been able to do before. You know, so it's got real potential to deepen our democracy, but it'll only do that if we set out deliberately to deepen it, as opposed to setting out deliberately to limit it and make sure that it serves a very particular audience.
I mean, as William was saying, the other side of that is government is going to try and communicate with its people. I know that in the last election there was this video that the president came up with and it resonated with the youth. He's now, it's almost, I guess, working against himself, because there'll be times when he needs to use the social media, but people are now limiting those access.
I think he's been the president for too long, firstly. I think it just highlights the problem we have in Africa with leaders not wanting to step down. If we had somebody younger, more dynamic, they'd understand the tool that social media is and would appreciate it even more. So I think that's another aspect we need to look at.
But some might say it's a tax, you know, services are rendered on everything. You can charge a tax. What's wrong with it?
So I don't have a problem with taxing these things. In fact, I think there's a good and sustainable argument to be presented about, for example, around the issues around broadcasting. We've seen this currently before our regulator, where you've got MultiChoice saying that actually, you know, these other things like Netflix, etc., are going to come in and undermine their model completely, and there's very real threat of that. So I think that saying you're going to tax the user and when they use that social media thing is the wrong approach. What you want to do is say, let's make sure that they behave as responsible corporate citizens, just like every other corporate entity in South Africa. They need to pay tax. They need to have transformation goals. If it's around broadcast issues or representation issues, they need to have certain percentage of local content. And the way that you bring them into the fold is to do those kinds of things. So should Facebook be paying tax in South Africa and Google, etc., or more tax? I just believe that they are paying tax or more tax. You know, those are arguments that you can have and the basis on which you tax them. But the moment you take it down to that individual level, how do you know if Queenan's got WhatsApp on her phone or Twitter? On what basis do they do that? It means that the mobile operator's got to be revealing a whole lot of information about her and critically her use of it. Where does she tweet? How often does she tweet? What does she? And then it gets down to, well, what is it that she's saying in that? And it gives them a way to track people and clamp down on it.
Gosh, Big Brother elevated. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to take a look at what's been happening on your digital front, social media, as we've been talking about, what's been trending, and then also we take a look at what's happening on the front pages of our newspapers and some of the stories behind. Stay with us.
The Western Cape needs national government to fulfill its mandate on ensuring a bulk water supply.
We must ensure that the city of Cape Town never confronts this particular situation again.
The ESCOM is serious about stamping out corruption, which is why the market is now beginning to accommodate us.
Looking at neighboring countries, expecting Botswana just to see partly cloudy skies with a half 34 in Gaborone.
News today at 3 p.m. from Monday to Friday on SABC News.
The Orange River is South Africa's major river. It rises in the Drakensberg in Lesotho, known as the Senqu River. It flows through Free State via Van der Kloof Dam, Eastern Cape into Gariep Dam, Northern Cape and Richterveld Transfrontier Park, which is part of Namibia. Orange River is 2,090 kilometers long. It finally flows into the Atlantic Ocean at Alexander Bay.
News at 9. We go beyond the headlines of the day and breaking news to bring you all the angles and in-depth analysis of stories that impact your life. We are on the ball with all economic stories. Our bureaus around the globe are ready to connect you to events as and when they happen. So join us every day at 9 to zoom in on the day's big stories.
Welcome back. You are watching Media Monitor, and at this time usually we start to stand on this digital wall here because we're taking a look at what's been happening in the digital space, in our digital segment, what's been happening on social media. And to help us unpack this is Matiba Sibanyoni, who's with our digital news team. It's been quite a week for quite a number of things, hasn't it? And I just wonder, take us through some of the big stories. What's been kind of coming through on social media?
So in South Africa, it's always busy, you know. There's never a day or a week where things are just smooth. For this week, we looked at Child Protection Week. So we've observed it, and it's been on social media, and a lot of comments, you know, mostly to talk about children's rights. I mean, these are some of the most vulnerable members of our communities.
All right, well, let's start by taking a look at Child Protection Week. Here's a little bit of background.
So this is one of the videos that we published on the SABC News website. It kind of gives you an idea of kind of a landscape of what's going on in the country in terms of the numbers, how many kids have been abused, or at least let's say the ones that have been reported to be abused. A lot of negative sentiment, unfortunately, on social media this week with you see a lot of kids being killed, sometimes being abused by people who are closest to them. So this week kind of puts a spotlight on the reporting that we do and talk about some of children's rights, what has been happening to them. This is one of two of the tweets that I noticed this week. When you're on social media, it kind of gives you, everybody gets a chance to comment. You see politicians, you see ordinary South Africans, and these tweets were one after another. The top one you'll see is one by government, talking about this week, this is what we are observing, and this is what you can do if children are being abused. Like, let's observe it, and these are the kind of things we can do. And right underneath it, you see somebody from KZN who posted a picture of children still struggling just to get to school. They have to cross rivers. But obviously when you look at these from a news point of view on social media, you have to see some people post pictures from a long time ago. So obviously our job is to suss out what's real and what's not. But it gives just about anybody an opportunity to have a little say and at least be heard.
Right, so the vulnerability is still there. And talking about vulnerable groups, your next story takes us to our hospitals, isn't it?
So I think anybody who's been on social media has seen this. There's been protests at the Charlotte Maxeke Hospital where it was just so sad to see there was dirt in corridors. You know that employees, including nurses, were protesting over unpaid benefits, and so this is one of the videos that was posted. The interesting thing about this is, as I said previously, social media gives people, politicians, ordinary South Africans, a spot. There was a politician who posted that. So when you look at it, you also have to look at it with a hint of who's posting, what are they saying.
But look, hospital is a place that's got to be the most sterile place. And so to start throwing rubbish is just really actually putting people's lives in danger, isn't it?
Exactly, and the sentiment on this hashtag was pretty negative. You know that nurses take pledges, so a lot of debate over people have a right to protest, but you've also taken a pledge to heal and protect, So where do we draw that line? And so it's quite interesting how the debate on that takes place with South Africans. Some people saying there's a lot of inequality in South Africa, and so people should be able to protest. And the love for the job that you do. Are nurses in South Africa taking their jobs because they love it, or because the unemployment is so high and they're forced to? So there's those kind of debates going on, which is pretty interesting.
And these are some of the tweets that kind of speak to what you're saying, how people were reacting. Eleanor Sisulu, they're quite concerned, no matter how justified your cause, blocking ambulances from entering or leaving hospital, it is criminal behavior. I mean, that's somebody's life that is being put in danger.
Exactly. It's pretty sad. It's very, very sad. But such discussions also open the journalists to start thinking about stories in a different way as well. When you cover the story from a nurse's point of view or from a patient's point of view, both want something, but so it's pretty interesting how you can get so many angles from such media.
All right. Well, so two gloomy stories.
Yes.
But one important, the Child Protection Week and Charlotte Maxeke. But yesterday it was all fun, and even the president came out.
I know.
And that was a surprise to a lot of people, wasn't it?
It was.
It is the big event for the music industry. What was it?
It is. So the Summers were on Saturday evening. Celebrities came out, and as usual, every year we see the usual fashion and a lot of gossip comes out of that. But one of the stories that we picked up as our job is to try and see things that are there but might not be as obvious to an ordinary viewer is the traditional music section, Every year, the traditional music category, they win, and a lot of publicity is there on radio, social media platforms. But when you come onto social media, as in Twitter and Facebook, there's much less love for traditional music, like Maskandi, for example. And stories like this, where Maskandi artists have come out to say that we also want love on social media as much as it gives us as journalists the opportunity to also cover traditional music as much as we may cover other kinds of music, So the main thing about traditional music in South Africa is that we've got our society is very different. We've got a lot of traditional rural areas where their social media is radio, mostly, one of the oldest. And in the urban areas you find Twitter and Facebook. So it's not necessarily that people are not talking about traditional music or Maskandi, it's where they are saying it, and it gives us quite a nice, interesting view on that. So they won the Maskandi album, and it was pretty great.
That's fantastic. But I did hear, though, that there was some people boycotting that didn't show up because they're not feeling that the Summers are not a representative.
Yes, but Peter, you realize that almost every year, and with most awards in South Africa, there's always drama. And if we are to really look at the different awards, obviously, I think all different ones have their own interests and focus on what matters to them. So there's always some some artists were like, no, they're not representative, or I wasn't treated well. So almost every year we look forward to also those kind of...
Mantiba, thanks very much indeed for highlighting all these stories for us. Talking about which, so that's the digital space, but there's also the print space. Can you imagine people still read newspapers? I know that some of you don't, but they still exist, and I love buying my Sunday newspapers and spending the whole day going through them. And William and Queenan are going to take us through some of the stories that grabbed their attention. Let's start with you, Queenan. What grabbed your attention in the papers this weekend?
So the Sunday World has a story about how a soccer player raped a 15-year-old girl, and how the case has not been handled properly. So with this kind of outbreak, or this recent scourge of abuse against women, especially all the reports we've been hearing, the recent Karabo Mokoena case, I think it's a very important story in that it tells you about the process that this young girl had to go through, and how police didn't particularly handle it in the best way, rather. And there's also another story on the Dispatch, the front page, why a woman dying for love. So
this one here,
yes,
this is quite scary.
It is.
Hey?
It is. So it not only looks at our ordinary women, it looks at one of our celebrities, Babe Zodumo, who's also accused the boyfriend of abuse. So I think it's a big topic right now in South Africa, and it's something that needs to be dealt with in the correct manner.
And this is a story, William, that's, you know, since the hashtag #MeToo has really shifted things. But there is a danger, of course, now that you're almost guilty until proven innocent now if any woman says that you've done something wrong to me. There doesn't seem to be at the moment now any question at all about the veracity of some of the statements. Once enough women say you're a problem, you're a problem.
Sure, but then look at what happens to some of these people. Precisely nothing. Some of them get re-elected to be the head of SAFA, for example, right? And how appropriate is that? Which is to say, obviously you need allegations to be tested in the appropriate fora, be in the workplace or wherever. But I think that the reality is that sexual harassment, sexual violence is there and clear and present, and it is something that happens with such frequency that, you know, even the SABC's announced an inquiry into it in this institution, you know, Jobs for Sex. It happens in all sectors of the media industry and NGOs and all sorts of places, in government, everywhere, we know. One of our ministers still there. So I think that in as much as there's a fear perhaps of the kind of thing you outline, that people might just go and say these things, often when these things happen, in most instances, in fact, it's not just hearsay, but there's very real lived experience and trauma that causes these things. And one of the reasons there's such low levels of reporting of these crimes is precisely because the victims and survivors in these instances feel that no one is going to believe them. You know, our levels of child violence are extraordinarily high. And again, you've got the same reason. One of the reasons they don't report is because people are going to not want to believe them. So you need to err on that side of saying this stuff does need to be aired. It needs to be there, and if people are there and they're wrongfully accused, that will come out.
All right, we're running out of time, so I'm going to rush you a little bit and say, what's your next story?
One of the things that I really enjoyed in today's City Press is it's called a total train smash, and the reason I'm highlighting it is because one of the things that we've seen with the state capture story is that often the issues behind it, the people, the ideas are so deeply complicated that actually understanding how they operate is really challenging. And what I like about this is it sets it out in a very nice, easy to understand manner, so that you can go through the different steps and you can actually remind yourself and understand, okay, so this is what they mean when they talk about money going from here to there. It gives people a way of actually understanding how corruption really operates, because the people that engage in this high level, you know, where it's billions of rands, they know what they're doing. They've got very clever people doing their dirty work.
This Gupta story as well, I mean, it's almost like if the company is Gupta linked, it's immediate that it is corruption. Is it possible that some of these transactions were legit?
Maybe the case could be, in some instances, that these companies did not know that the Guptas were doing illegal transactions. I think that is possible. But as far as whether it's a clean deal where the Guptas are involved, usually it's not.
Okay, all right, we'll leave this for the time being. But here's a really bizarre story. A Russian journalist who was reported to have been shot dead in Kiev turned up alive at a news conference in Ukraine. Yes, Arkady Babachenko emerged at a police press conference on Wednesday afternoon in front of journalists who had been expecting updates on the investigation into his murder.
I have buried both friends and colleagues many times, and I know this horrible feeling of having to bury them. I would like to apologize for what you have all had to go through, but there was no other way of doing it. Separately, I want to apologize to my wife for the hell that she has been through during these 2 days. Olechka, I am very sorry, but there were no other options. As far as I know, this operation was prepared over 2 months. I was made aware 1 month ago. Over this month, I saw how the guys worked, how they dug things up like buffaloes. Over this month, we were in constant contact. We thought things through and worked out the details. The result of that became this special operation, as a result of which one person has been detained.
All right, okay, so let me turn to my journalists here. I mean, what do you make of this story? There's something very, very suspect about this. Queen?
It's very bizarre. I mean, when I saw the story at first, I was very sympathetic to his wife, firstly. I'm like, how could you do that? And how does she not know that you're going to fake your own death? But at the same time, it was for good cause, because it was part of a situation where there was a hit list of 30 people who were supposed to be killed by the Russian government, allegedly. And he was one of the men who was on the list. And through this, they were able to get one of the hitmen and arrest them. So I think something good did come out of it, but still it must have been traumatic for anybody who knows him. Yeah.
But this does speak to Russian modus operandi. So if you think about the story in the UK recently, that former spy. Yeah.
I guess the thing is, I mean, we know these things happen. I mean, often we think they only happen in movies. The thing that doesn't make sense to me is, okay, so you go and you fake his death in order to protect him from being assassinated by these people that are going to kill him. And then a short while later you say, ha, he's not dead. And it's like, well, and surely the Russians, if they're allegedly behind this, are going to go, no, hang on a minute. This time we're going to make sure that we do take you out. Like, why? Something doesn't add up. Even if you arrest one of the people, one of the alleged hitmen, you know, what about the others that are going to be coming in to take their place? So there's something still in the story
or is it that you create so much drama and publicity that they can't possibly kill you now.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, because now if he dies in the next week, we know exactly who did it. Yeah.
Even if it's not the Russians, it's the Russians.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I guess, so then you have to ask, in whose interest is that, right? Because this is the Ukrainian secret police that allegedly went to all of these lengths to protect them. Since when have they had such a strong position on media freedom that they would go and protect a citizen from another nation because he's a journalist in order to make sure that potentially they could expose some wrongdoing with no ulterior motive? Because, of course, that's how the secret police operate in every state. I mean, come on, you know?
I think there's a movie here for sure. All right, now listen, you may have been watching in social media and seeing a black screen that says #Black is coming. Well, SABC News is rebranding, and the GE of News and Current Affairs took a little bit of time to explain some of the reasons behind the changes. Let's take a look.
The very first thing that we're doing with this rebranding, in fact, it's not even rebranding, it's going back to basics. Going back to what we exist to do as SABC News. We know what happened in the recent past, and we've been part of that story of the SABC, even though I was outside the SABC at the time. But the reality is, our brand reputation is in trouble. And the first thing that we're trying to fix is to get the public to trust what we do as credible. And it's to restore the integrity of SABC News. And it's also to try and regain legitimacy with our peers in the industry and the professionals who work within our industry. So that exercise is very much in line with our public mandate as SABC News. So in what we are doing is to say, as we go back to basics, for whom do we exist as SABC News? And we exist for the benefit of the South African citizen. And that's exactly where we are going with this rebranding. So we are going there saying the character of our journalism has to have social conscience, and that in the decisions that we make, we have to think about our public mandate, and that we have to be inclusive in our coverage, and that we cannot afford to have the inequalities that we see in terms of access to information. So we have to make sure that South Africans get the information they require, which is quality and credible information, not just information that we give them because we can. It has to resonate with the requirements that we have to meet in terms of their needs. So that's where we're going with the project. In what you're going to see on Monday, we're going to go to the public and say, we are the news service that you deserve as South Africans. And we care about the work that we do that is of service to you. And we care about your requirements as South Africans and not as fragments of society, as in focusing on this part of the country instead of that. So our responsibility is to the South African citizen as in the entire country. So we're going that route. So you're going to see a very robust newsroom to start with, where people are allowed to speak courageously about the things they see that are a deviation from our public mandate. So we're going to allow a space where even the producer sitting on the desk is able to say, this is not in line with what we are here for. So we are going to allow that kind of environment, that people can speak out without fearing victimization. And we're going to allow constructive dissent, that people are going to say, I completely disagree with this because this is what I see. Here's the danger that I see to our editorial character.
So it's all happening starting tomorrow. We're going to look very different, and we're hoping that you've started to notice actually as well that the storytelling also has taken a turn, and we're going to do even more. But final words from you, perhaps some of the things you've seen and your hopes for the public broadcaster. We'll start with you, Queen.
I think in the last couple of months I've seen a great shift. I mean, the reporting has been quite good. I've been enjoying watching SABC News. I think it's a good step. I mean, rebranding is always a good option. It means a new beginning. It means that there's going to be change, and it's a time to reflect on mistakes that you've done in the past.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. William?
Branding's good, but what matters more is what's happening behind the scenes. The fact that we're seeing SABC stories trending on social media for some of the right reasons, which is when people are in power are put in uncomfortable positions, I think is a very powerful and important thing. The fact that they are having inquiries into sexual harassment and sex for work and into the editorial interference in the SABC are critical things, and that we're seeing a board and a news entity that's seeking to explain and be open and transparent rather than one that seeks to think that they know everything. So it's, we're very positive and optimistic about changes. They're slow, but they're coming.
William Bird, thank you very much indeed. Queen Maswabi, thank you very much indeed for your insights today. You guys were great guests. And that's where we're going to leave it. So watch out tomorrow, starting with Morning Live. It's going to be a new look, but as William was saying, please pay attention to the content. We're working hard to earn your trust and be the public broadcaster you deserve. That's Media Monitor for today.